Today, I have the great pleasure of speaking with Tasman Crowe. And Taz is Professor and Director of the Earth Institute at University College Dublin. And we will chat about interdisciplinary collaboration to inform green environmental management and policy. Hi, Taz. How are you today?
Great to be back on the campus teaching over the last trimester as well. And there's been really a lot of great activities and initiatives over the past couple of years to help maintain that sense of collegiality and engagement at UCD. Yeah, and by no means very near the top of that list would be this one. So congratulations on running this program right through the lockdown. It's been great.
Oh, thanks so much. And it's a credit to the team that worked behind the scenes on this, let me tell you. So Taz, you are Professor and Director of the Earth Institute at UCD. Can you please tell our audience about your role and what makes you so passionate about what you do?
Thanks, Patricia. Yeah, as Director of the Earth Institute, my role is really to help build a strong community of researchers from across the spectrum of disciplines at UCD so that we can better address environmental and sustainability challenges. And part of the real pleasure is that I work with a great team of colleagues in the Institute to run events and activities that bring people together, help them identify and capitalize on funding opportunities, put them in touch with stakeholders and potential industry partners, support the partnerships that emerge, and to help then with the dissemination and outreach to further improve UCD's profile and impact in this area. And I've also been able to benefit from the enthusiasm of the Earth Institute community to collaborate with a number of colleagues on the development of the BSc in Sustainability, which was launched last year and is also extremely rewarding as an undertaking. So I do think UCD is so well placed to offer this kind of breadth and depth of coverage of sustainability topics, both in teaching and research, covering so many different facets of the natural, physical and social sciences, engineering, arts and humanities, so really across the whole spectrum of the university.
Oh yeah, and huge congratulations on that. That's an absolute superb degree. So moving on to your title, Taz, Interdisciplinary Collaboration to Inform Marine Environmental Management and Policy. Can you please tell our audience more about this?
Thanks. Yeah, well, the title came particularly from the collaborative research projects I've enjoyed being involved with over the years. And we've provided quite a bit of evidence to underpin policy and management in one way or another. But more recently, I've also been very lucky to get some opportunities to bring these experiences and findings together, particularly through my role over the past couple of years as chair of an advisory group on the expansion of Ireland's network of marine protected areas. The group was actually convened by the Minister and comprised a range of experts from within and outside Ireland, with interests ranging from life and ocean sciences through cultural and socioeconomic aspects and policy and governance. And as such, with this kind of diverse group, through a lot of talking and a lot of hard work, we were able to explore and summarize the best available evidence and advice as to how to go about expanding our MPA network from 2.14% coverage as it is now to 10% as soon as is practicable and 30% by 2030. And these big increases are in line with international commitments and a part of the programme for government. So there's a real sense of optimism that many of our recommendations will be taken up and used. And the kind of research that feeds into it includes, for example, quite a sustained body of work by my research group, led particularly by Paul Brooks, who's a senior postdoc in the group, working on the combined effects of multiple stressors on marine ecosystems, such as invasive species, nutrient pollution, and changes in temperature and freshwater input linked to climate change. And this kind of knowledge really helps us advise on which combinations of stressors should be particularly avoided in a given area because they exacerbate each other's effects, and which may actually be more acceptable because they may reduce each other's effects.
Okay, so I'm sure our audience will have a lot of questions about that. I know I do myself. So please do remember to submit your questions via the chat function. But the last question I have for you, Taz, is, as you know, in UCD Discovery, we were incredibly passionate about interdisciplinarity, and we were just wondering, how important is this to your work?
Yeah, absolutely. Interdisciplinarity is completely central to the Earth Institute as well. So the great minds think alike. Its raison d'etre is really to serve as a bridge between the disciplinary strengths that are nurtured at school and college level. And that's because solutions to environmental and sustainability challenges absolutely rely on a combination of science and technology with social sciences, arts, and humanities. And that's because all sustainability challenges have a human dimension. It's so important to understand the cultural and societal and economic interfaces with the environment. What do people value about it? How do they feel when it's under threat? What changes are they willing to accept? How can economic activity be continued in a given area, but with less or even positive impacts on the environment? And we have to be able to answer these questions if we're to find workable solutions, and if the science that myself and others do is to be applied effectively. Often we've developed sufficient scientific understanding and effective solutions to a particular challenge, but the bottleneck is then with uptake by society or by industry or by policymakers or practitioners. So that's a key area for us to work on, I think, and that's what really requires that interdisciplinary interaction there.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much, Tasman. And I have a lot of questions, and there are a lot of questions coming in already. So let's kick off already with the first. This is a long one, so bear with me. The quality of water in Dublin Bay after rainfall has become a contentious issue as more Dubliners began sea swimming during the pandemic. How urgent is it for the government to sort out, for example, the Ringsend water treatment plant?
Yeah, and I thought that's a good question, and it's certainly a lot of investment was made in the Ringsend water treatment plant. At the time, it was a really massive step change because, I mean, prior to that, essentially raw sewage was finding its way directly into Dublin Bay. So that was a massive change. But what kind of has happened since then, I guess, is that the population of Dublin has continued to expand and increase, and so the pressure on that situation builds. So I think it is going to be important into the future to make sure that the capacity for water treatment keeps track of the increasing population and the increasing kind of demands on our water. And there's active research in UCD, led by UCD, that's exploring the water quality in Dublin Bay. For example, the Acclimatise project that Meyer is coordinating. You know, so there's a lot of concern and interest in understanding better how we can improve water quality in Dublin Bay.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions coming in. Here's one for you. There is an obvious problem policing the coastline. Can, for example, use of satellite imaging help with that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and there's long answers to that. So I mean, the place I'll start, I guess, is one of the core recommendations of our report to government. Was really, it's so essential to have a high level of really good community engagement with any initiatives that you're trying to undertake in coastal and marine environment, because fundamentally, you know, Ireland doesn't have the resource to police every activity that's going on all of the time. And what you really need is people to understand and appreciate and relate to what you're trying to achieve with the protections that are put in place, and for there to be a buy-in and a sense of stewardship. And obviously that's not an easy thing to necessarily generate, but I think it's really very, very important to try to do that. But so that's the most important thing, I think. But there are technological solutions to help with quite a lot of things as well. I mean, especially in terms of the fishing industry, you know, there are more and more sophisticated vessel monitoring systems that can track the movements of vessels and the speed that they're going, which is indicative of what they're doing in a particular place, and so on. So, you know, and kind of the framework for protection for the marine environment kind of needs that combined approach. We have to be able to benefit from those technologies in the most appropriate way, as well as from a more generalized sense of stewardship.
Okay, interesting. So actually there's a lot of questions about stressors, and you spoke about that in one of your answers earlier. And so here's one that a guest is specifically asking about. They're saying, and it's plastics and in general marine pollution, but our guest is wondering about what the impact is of these plastics on the marine life, but also impact on us as humans as well.
Yeah,
big question.
It's very topical and very much an active field of research and policy as well. I mean, it's a good friend of mine was actually the first to coin the phrase microplastics, so I've taken an interest in it. You know, so the evidence has gradually been pieced together to show that the microscopic plastics are able to find their way into the organisms that that feed in amongst the sediments and so on, and the worms and so on, and they have the potential then to find their way back, further up the food web through the fish and into us, I guess. And there's quite active research in exactly then what they may do negatively to affect us, and whether, for example, they act as a vehicle for carrying other contaminants attached to the surface of the plastic into our systems and so on. And again, it's always a little more complex than you might think. So there are some senses in which there are some contaminants that they do seem to form attachments to them, others that don't. So it's really early days, and the real detail, I'm not sufficiently up to speed with the literature to be able to give a definitive answer, but I'd say that the jury is still out on exactly what the impacts are on ecosystems and on society and on human health. But there's a lot of evidence being generated all around the world now on that question.
Really interesting. I mean, for me as a biomedical scientist, that's incredibly interesting. But I better move on, because we've so many questions for you. So again, it's around pollution, but impact of fish farms on marine protected areas, for example.
Yeah, that's another good question. And a few years ago, actually back in kind of 2012, we did a research project looking at exactly that, the kind of the footprint from fish farms, where the kind of food, the excess food and nutrients associated with that go to, and they're the other contaminants that might be used, the medicines that are used on the fish and so on. And we found that they did spread sort of certainly up to 25 meters away, but then the signal dissipated maybe 100 to 200 meters away with the detection of them. And a lot of the aquaculture in Irish systems is in quite high energy environments. So the evidence that comes from more enclosed Scottish sea lochs, which is most of the evidence, shows a much more damaging picture.
Okay.
That's not to say that we should be complacent in an Irish situation. That there are definitely impacts there, and the industry is actually quite receptive to working to reduce those impacts. It depends very heavily on the good image of the Irish system, the Irish ecosystems, as part of the allure, the attraction. So most Irish seafood products are branded as being, green origin or organic and so on. But again, that's not always straightforward. I think there's been recent exposés around origin green doesn't necessarily mean that everything's being done in the most sustainable way possible. So, again, a more complex situation. There are situations in which aquaculture can have limited impacts. There are others in which it really would have quite severe impacts. And from a marine protected area point of view, the important question to ask is whether the way that it's being done in the places that it's being done would be in direct conflict with the conservation objectives of that particular protected area. So that's always the question that we're proposing needs to be asked. It shouldn't just be a blanket ban on any potentially harmful activity for the environment. There should be discussion and dialogue to work through, what things really should be prevented, given what you're trying to protect in that particular area, and what things could be allowed, but maybe in an alternative location or with a different kinds of management practices to reduce their impacts right now.
Okay, Taz, now we're completely running out of time, and I have so many questions here for you, so I don't want to leave a completely disappointed audience. So we'll do a very quick fire round, okay? But along the same lines, it's an interesting one. We're about to see foods like impossible salmon and beyond fish, i.e. fish grown in a lab. Is that better for the environment? You don't have to answer that if you don't
have a direct answer to that. I'd need to know more. But quite possibly,
fair enough.
There's a lot of interesting new developments in that area.
And there's another one around freshwater, actually, and invasive species such as zebra mussels proliferating in some of Ireland's freshwater lakes. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, I'm not completely up to speed with the current situation, but they are very well known for spreading very fast and becoming very dominant in the ecosystems that they take over and changing them very dramatically. Again, one of my PhD students did some work on that in collaboration with Mary Kelly Quinn a good number of years, 2010, I guess that work was kind of coming out. But so in other parts of the world, they've certainly really dramatically altered the system. They have a range of impacts, and they actually clarify the water to some degree.
Okay.
But because they're filter feeders, but they they completely cover the seabed or the lake bed, and in North America they've been presented massive problems because they coat artificial structures, including power plant intakes and so on, and just completely clog everything up. So there's been a real concerted effort to get them under control.
Okay, so I've got to finish. This is our last question, Taz. Water covers just over 70% of the Earth's surface, but with rising sea levels and climate change, can you foresee a future tipping point? This to end. Huge question, but sorry, not you.
In terms of the kind of coverage of the ocean and the degree to which we're having
well, it's rising sea levels, climate change. Is there a future tipping point?
Well, I guess there are a number of, I think there's some publications around the kind of big critical crunch points, things that could happen with climate change that would make a step change, so including, for example, the melting of the tundra and the flows of water that would come from that. And so I think there are like 7 or 8 events that are predicted that could have a very dramatic change, cause very dramatic changes to the ocean and ocean circulation and so on. So yeah, I think science fiction scenarios are not beyond the realms of possibility, depending on how things pan out. So we definitely do need to be doing something to rein things in.
And that's what is wonderful about the research you do and the research of the Earth Institute, and how incredible it is, and what you are doing, and it's only to be loudly applauded. So thank you so much, Taz, and we are completely out of time, so sincere apologies to all of those in the audience whose questions I did not get to, but I wanted to take this opportunity to again say a huge thank you to Taz. Fascinating discussion today.
Thanks very much indeed, Patricia, and thanks very much for running the event and for hosting. Thanks.
Oh, you're very most welcome, and thanks to everyone for joining in, and have a wonderful Christmas, everyone, and see you all in 2022 for more Zoom for Thought. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye.
Sure.